They're not trying to get their nose in this anymore. And what's the third pool? The third pool is Saudi Arabia, the UAE. These are the states that are most under threat. And what has Saudi Arabia done just in the last week? They've gone to cooperate more with Pakistan. They have a security deal with Pakistan. What does that mean? They're looking to Pakistan as much or maybe even more than the United States as their guarantor of security. So all of this coalition, it's not all siding with Iran right now, it's fragmenting. And that's weakening America.
So what happens next?
As President Trump wants to do, call the war off. That's not going to put us back to February 27. Iran has 20% of the world's oil. It's going to be able to have $75 billion, $100 billion of revenues here over the next year. And also those deeply buried caves and tunnels where they have their drones, that can be used to fashion nuclear weapons. Within a year, Iran could have nuclear weapons and we can't stop it. So if we pull back, you can start to see that Iran's power is going to grow internally. But then even more than that, its relationships with Russia, its relationships with China will start to move closer together against America. And you see this happening from the moment, almost the first several days of the war. Russia almost immediately offered Iran military targeting information to target U.S. ships. That's why our carriers are so far away. It's because Russia has the ability to see those carriers, tell Iran where they are, and if those carriers get too close, man, they're going to be smashed. But it can get worse than that, Stephen. Because as this power grows over time, as these incentives for China, Russia, and Iran to cooperate against America grow over time, Iran has control now of 20% of the world's oil. Russia has 11% of the world's oil. That means there can be either formal or tacit cooperation to take 30% of the world's oil off the global market, let China soak up a whole lot of that, and that can truly produce mega economic consequences for America, for Europe. And why are they not going to do that? Because they're nice guys? Is that really what we're counting on now? Russia, Putin is not going to want to wreck America's economy because he has a bond with Donald Trump.
What do you think the fundamental flawed assumption was at the start of all of this from the United States?
That Iran was weak on its last legs, and all we had to do was push it over the edge of a cliff, and it was just a matter of just one more push.
And then the people would rise up and...
Yeah, we have painted a picture of Iran as beaten down, as the reason it's not retaliating very much is they have no capability to retaliate. And I tell you this, Stephen. So I've been in big debates here at the Council on Foreign Relations in New York, where I've literally been the only person on the stage to stand up and warn that this picture of Iran is way too negative. There was a widespread, I think, false assumption across the foreign policy community, no one willing to really stand up and challenge it very strongly, that Iran was basically collapsing on its own. This was always, in my view, underestimating the power of Iran. And you say, well, where does my view come from? It came from the modeling of the bombing. What would happen as this went forward? And none of these elements of Iran's power were ever knocked out.
When I looked through the response to the last conversation, the audience had lots of different types of questions. So I'm going to try and represent some of the audience's questions to try and bring them into the conversation. One of them was about Israel's role in this. And I thought it might actually link to what you just said about where we get our intelligence from that informs the decisions we make. Because there are some people that are skeptical that the intelligence is coming from Israel and that therefore that it might not be as accurate as if it was coming from our own sources.
I would say Israel has been playing the role of diplomatic spoiler. So in the 12-day war, last June, when the U.S. bombed Fordo, we've been focusing on that. That happened in the middle of the 12-day war. Donald Trump said he was going to negotiate with a certain set of Iranians, and literally the next day, Uh, 36 hours later, Israeli air power killed them, killed the negotiators we were set to negotiate with. This was totally spoiling the idea of a diplomatic outcome because they were dead. So you couldn't have a negotiated outcome. Now, if we come to February 28th, who dropped the first bombs that killed the supreme leader, that killed those other several dozen doves that he was meeting with?
Dove.
Donald Trump, as many of our governments have, describes that you had a balance of hawks and doves inside of the Iranian government. And the idea here is with leadership decapitation is, well, if you kill the hawks, then the doves will just be the ones left. We did the opposite, or more correctly, the bombing was started by Israel on February 28. We came in behind. And in fact, Secretary Rubio, our Secretary of State, explained a few days later that Israel basically backed us in a corner because Israel said, we're going to kill that supreme leader, whether you like it or not. And that is going to maybe lead to attacks on your military bases. So you better prepare an air campaign to come behind. And Rubio said that's what happened. Because again, just before the February 28 bombing, we're negotiating with Iran and we're killing the very people that Trump was saying are the ones we wanted to negotiate with, the ones who were going to help move Iran closer to the American position. That was Israel as spoiler.
So there's this individual called Ali Larijani, the former secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, and he was killed in an Israeli-led airstrike on March 17th, 2026. Trump claimed on True Social that, I can't say his name, but I'm going to try, Larijani was the primary contact for a 10-point peace proposal that Trump had called workable and a basis for a real agreement. Trump suggested that the strike was poorly timed when Israel killed him and complained that Israel's lone wolf actions were complicating his ability to wrap up the war on his own terms. He famously posted that he was inches away from the biggest deal in history before the assassination reset the clock.
So this would be the third instance then of Israel as diplomatic spoiler. What you're hearing from Trump's own mouth is he thought he was close to a working relationship, maybe not a full deal, with a certain set of individuals, in this case, Larijani. And what did Israel do when they found out about it?